and a former additional secretary and as secretary of the Right to Information. So when I was working as the secretary for Right to Information, I worked there for 5 years and later on took voluntary retirement from the civil services to take up my passion of coaching students, mentoring students for the civil services. As a civil servant, I completed 29 years of service in prime positions in the government of Karnataka. I also was selected by the UPSC twice in 1980 and 1981 for the civil services. That then we had the same. It was the first time the concept of prelim, mains, and interview was introduced in 1980, which continues even till today. But then in the first batch which was introduced, we had an optional for the preliminary and a general studies paper. Now we have a modification of the prelims with 2 papers. Of course, there's no optional in the prelim. And the mains, we had 2 optionals in addition to 2 papers in general studies. Now, of course, we have 4 general studies papers and a single option. So today, for discussion, I take up a topic in general studies paper 2, statutory bodies. Now, general studies paper 2 relating to it comprises of 3 units, as I told you earlier: polity, governance, international relations. Polity, we have a unit on constitutional bodies, statutory bodies, regulatory bodies, quasi-judicial bodies. Today we are taking up a discussion on a single statutory body which is in the news, that is the National Human Rights Commission. So we'll see the question which we are taking up for discussion today. The Supreme Court recently labeled the National Human Rights Commission a toothless tiger. In the light of the statement, examine the issues related to the functioning of the NHRC. As I told you earlier, the examiner wants to know from you what are the issues regarding the functioning of the National Human Rights Commission. So in your answer, you're not going to write whatever you know about the NHRC, its composition, its functions, and other issues which you may have known, which you may have read. So you resist the temptation of putting in whatever you know. The question is very specific. Examine the issues relating to the functioning of the NHRC. Suggest reforms. So first, a brief background about the NHRC. Before we go into a discussion on the NHRC, I'd like to spend about a minute talking about statutory bodies. Statutory bodies are there to enforce a statute. Now you take the RTI Act of 2005. It is an act enacted by Parliament. Now to enforce the act, we require a body. So the Central Information Commission at the center, the State Information Commission at the state was created as a statutory body to implement the provisions of the Right to Information Act 2005. Similarly, the NHRC is another statutory body which we are taking up for discussion today. It was set up in 1993 to enforce the Protection of Human Rights Act. So what does the NHRC do? It is the protector, advisor, monitor, and educator of human rights. This will be the introduction to your answer. Just a brief introduction. Like in the introduction, you spell out what the statutory body does, what are its main roles. Come to the first part of the answer. Examine the issues related to the functioning of the NHRC. See, the first important issue which I would like to point out: selection of the chairman and the members. Now the NHRC, like any other statutory body, is headed by a chairman and there are members. Now, how are these people elected? Obviously, it is on political grounds, and the government plays a dominant role in their selection. So once the government interferes in the selection process, you cannot expect the chairman or the members to be impartial in functioning. So the first issue which I would like to point out is the manner of selection of the chairman and members. Obviously, the chairman and members would have served in government earlier, and by the time they retire, they look for post-retirement positions, and going by the equation of the political boss, they get accommodated in such statutory bodies. The second issue, see, whenever the NHRC gets a complaint, instead of suo moto going into that, it directs the local police for inquiry. This is another important thing. See, you have gone to the NHRC for justice, and now the NHRC is sending your complaint to the same police for inquiry. So what justice can you expect in such a situation? Take the violations by the armed forces. See, the armed forces violations, extrajudicial killings, or encounter killings, that is also there in the police also. Now, these violations by the armed forces are beyond the scope of inquiry of the NHRC. The NHRC is dependent on the government for funds and functionaries. It does not have its own staff. It has to depend on the government for deputed staff at all levels. And every year, it requires government allocation to carry on its duties. An important issue relating to the functioning is the preparation of annual report. See, every organization is supposed to present an annual report on its functioning and submit it to the nodal ministry. Then that is placed in Parliament. Very often there is a delay in the preparation of the annual reports, and the suggestions made by the commission, by the statutory body, do not get the attention of the parliamentarians. When the parliament debates, see, the annual report is not available. There is a delay in preparation of annual report. A most important disparity is, see, the NHRC cannot interfere in denial of economic, social and cultural rights. Now you take the right to work, right to health, social security. Suppose I am affected. I cannot go to the NHRC and say my economic or social or cultural rights are violated. The NHRC cannot interfere in such matters. They are kept out of the purview of the NHRC. Another peculiar thing is the NHRC cannot take action on complaints pending for more than a year. Now, most of us face the problem of private disputes or harassment by private professionals. See, I give an example of a construction project where the contractor is constantly harassing the owner. Now, in such a act of harassment by a private professional, where do I go? I cannot approach the NHRC. See, the NHRC is protection of human rights. What about private disputes? Why are they excluded? Then, the NHRC cannot punish or imprison an offender. See, these are the glaring disparities or glaring issues which are affecting the functioning of the National Human Rights Commission. Then I'll come to the question of reforms. First reform I would suggest is transparency in selecting members. See, now you take the appointment of course, the problem of transparency is very much required. This has hit the composition of many statutory bodies. Confining myself to NHRC, what I would suggest is, apart from the judicial members on which you are prioritizing, include retired civil servants, include members of the civil society, include members of the media, social media. So what will happen is once you broad base the selection, the organization can work in impartial manner. If you back the organization with government nominees, ex-government officials who are very in close contact with the political bosses, you cannot expect any justice from such an organization. The NHRC needs to be outspoken in defense of human rights. It need not feel shy. See, of course, yeah, it is. If you see the annual report of the NHRC, you can see facts and figures on how it has played a role in this extraterritorial killings, police excesses. Of course, it has done nothing. It has done its part, but it needs to be more outspoken. See, when an organization is created specifically for the purpose of protection of human rights, you need to be outspoken. You need not hide behind the government for everything. Another reform which I would suggest is the NHRC should interfere in proceedings where there are violations of human rights. See, it should have the power to interfere in judicial proceedings also, where there are violations of human rights, because unless it interferes, the victim may not get justice. Finally, what I would suggest is you give the NHRC a distinct status, give it its own space, give it more funds, people to man the organization. I mean, allow it autonomy. See, you are making it accountable. You with accountability, you also give it autonomy. Autonomy is day-to-day functioning. Of course, government has got the right on the overall management. Government can interfere if there are glaring irregularities. But what I'm saying, what I'm suggesting is, you give the organization autonomy coupled with accountability. These two are required for giving the organization a distinct status. So when we discuss the functioning of the NHRC, again, as I told you, avoid the tendency of writing whatever you know. Try to plan your answer. Say, in any standard general studies paper, you are required to answer 20 questions in a span of 3 hours. So 20 questions in a span of 3 hours, the average being 9 minutes per question. So what would happen is, you plan your answer, you systematize your answer by being very specific in relation to what the examiner has asked. Don't try to stuff your answer with facts and figures which are not relevant to the answer. Resist the temptation. See, because what is going to happen is, you will have to answer 20 questions in 3 hours. As I said earlier, give importance to all questions. Even questions, it is not that you may have information on all the questions. It happens, certain questions you may not get ready information. What you can do, whatever you know about the question, you attempt. Don't leave out any question in the exam. So this is how you answer a question on General Studies Paper 2, Polity, Statutory Bodies, Working of the NHRC, issues related to the functioning of the NHRC. I pointed out the issues with suggestion on what reforms are required. So this will be the comprehensive manner of answering a 200-word note. Thank you.